Hi, Simon. Thank you for having us today. Could you please do a quick self-introduction to the audiences and readers of our platform?
Sure, it's great to be with you and thank you for the chance. As Australia's Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, my job is to make sure that our economic partnerships with countries throughout the world, but especially in our region, are as strong as possible to help ensure that our exporters and our trading relationships and our tourism industry are sustaining as many jobs as possible for Australians.
So we understand that you just went to China to attend the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership talk. Any significant progress or updates?
Indeed, so the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP as it's known, is really exciting. It brings together 16 countries, the 10 ASEAN nations, plus China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand and India. And altogether that's about half of the world's population, around a third of the world's economic activity or GDP. And what we're trying to do here is build a new trading bloc, a new trade agreement that can ensure as much connectivity between and within all of those countries as possible.
So many say that RCEP is now very vital in defending the global trading order. What's your take on this?
Well, RCEP is important in substance, in that what we hope is for an agreement that ensures across trade in goods, services, investment, that we have better integration and opening up of economic activity within our Asian region. And opening up of the Asian region has been central to its growth over recent years, but also it's important symbolically because it will demonstrate that despite some of the protectionist sentiments that are occurring in other parts of the world and some of the other global trade tensions that occur, our region is sticking to the proven formula of trade liberalisation and open markets to keep creating business growth and more jobs.
That's absolutely great. How's the current trade performance between Australia and China? Could you share some of your insights on the free trade agreement between China and Australia? In terms of trade and investment, how important is China to Australia?
The China-Australia Free Trade Agreement has been one of the great success stories for both countries. It has seen significant growth in two-way trade, and China now stands as Australia's #1 trading partner in two-way trade terms, also #1 in terms of our export sales. But importantly, it has created real opportunities in both countries. Many of the products that we send to China in the resources sector and the agriculture sector in particular are then value added in China, are then used to fuel production in China. And so it creates more jobs and opportunities in Australia and more jobs and opportunities in China. And at present, all of those trading figures stand at record levels, and that's a demonstration of the strength in terms of the relationship.
So indeed, China is very important in terms of trade to Australia. However, there have been some dissenting voices on the relationship between Australia and China. Some say that Australia should take restrictive measures and controls over Chinese investment in Australia. What's your thought about this? What could we do in order to improve and expand the trade partnership between the two countries?
Well, Australia is one of the most open countries in the world when it comes to investment. Very open and more open than most other countries, and of course including more open than China when it comes to the purchase and investment of Australian business and business activities. And what we've tried to do though is make sure that in being very open to investment, we still have to maintain community support for that investment, and we still have to ensure that it protects Australia's sovereignty and our national security. And they're really the only safeguards or boundaries that we've put around investment to make sure that where it happens, it's in the national interest, and where it happens, it doesn't undermine the national security interests of Australia. And I think we've got that balance pretty right. And again, we've seen strong growth in relation to Chinese investment in Australia, but also we've seen Australian business investment in China grow in sectors where that is allowed too.
So in the past 2 years, the Australian property market has been struggling. Do you think it is directly related to the decline of Chinese investment in Australia? Could you share some stats on Chinese investment in Australia?
Look, there's probably a number of factors at play in terms of the Australian property market, and yes, perhaps some of the tightening around the purchase of residential property could be at play there, but that's important for maintaining that social, that community licence in Australia for investment, that ultimately Australians welcome productive investment in Australia, which helps businesses to grow and sustains and fuels jobs. But investment into residential housing stock that just locks that up and makes it more expensive for people living here to buy a house, well, that of course was creating some element of tension, and hence some of the regulatory changes that applied there.
Yeah, for sure. So in the Melbourne property market, we can see that the Malaysian investors are now taking over as the key buyers of the market instead of Chinese buyers. Is Australia going to introduce new measures to encourage or bring back the Chinese investment, not only in property, but maybe in other sectors as well?
Well, our approaches are non-discriminatory. We don't identify between Chinese investors or buyers versus Malaysian investors or buyers. There are times where state-owned buyers, again, regardless of the country they come from, may trigger additional checks or safeguards relative to commercial or private-owned investors or buyers. But otherwise, we take an approach that the law applies commonly, regardless of where anybody's from. And equally, our desire is not to attract foreign investors to fuel growth in house prices. Our desire is that foreign investment is targeted in the productive areas of the economy that help businesses to grow, ideally exports to grow and jobs to be created.
So during your visit in China, there were unfortunately protests and strikes broke out in Hong Kong, China. So we understand that in March this year, Hong Kong and Australia have just signed the free trade agreement. Do you think this instability is going to impact the trade partnership between the two?
I hope not. Australia respects the one country, two system approach to the management of Hong Kong, China. That's why we embarked upon and signed a free trade agreement with Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, despite also having a free trade agreement with the People's Republic of China. And it's about making sure that in that sense we do respect the systems as they exist. Hong Kong is in and of itself a very valued trading partner for Australia and one of our largest. And so I hope and trust that the tensions that have existed there can be resolved peacefully, and we certainly urge that to be the case. From Australia's perspective, we continue to work as closely as we can with both governments, the government of the Hong Kong region as well as the national government of China, and we continue to encourage our businesses to engage according to the laws of each location.
Trump's threat of tariffs on $300 billion of imports have shocked the market last Friday. And we understand that you said that you're very disappointed by Trump, and China has also vowed to retaliate, and you said that you'll stand by China. How do you think Australia is going to balance the relationships between the countries in this trade war?
Well, Australia takes a principled approach to these things, and we don't seek to take sides at all. What we seek to do is continue to urge people to work in accordance with the international rules-based order, the structures that were developed around, in this case, the World Trade Organization, to ensure that countries behave in a respectful way to each other, and that we do try, where possible, to liberalise and open up trading markets in a way that maximises job creation. Now, what we've seen in terms of the escalation of trade tensions that has occurred going backwards and forwards between China and the United States, as well as some other trade tensions around the world, is that that's had a negative impact on global economic growth. And that's bad news for everybody, because slower rates of economic growth mean we're not creating as much prosperity and we're not creating as many jobs as could otherwise be the case.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So any thoughts on this trade war that's been going on and Trump's discussions about this?
Australia can't resolve the trade tensions between the US and China. We urge them to continue dialogue and to try to find a way to rectify that. Yep. In the interim, we will continue to engage as our own sovereign country according to our interests, our principles and values, and making sure that where we can, we expand Australia's economic cooperation, create new regional architecture, as well as negotiating trade agreements, for example, with the EU and the UK should they ultimately leave the EU as part of Brexit.
So one last question, is there anything else you would like to share with the Chinese community in Australia or worldwide?
Look, the Chinese community in Australia is an incredibly valued part of our business, economic, investment and trade community nowadays. Increasingly, we know that trade activity that occurs from Australia, particularly with China, but also right across our region, is fueled by Chinese Australians who are entrepreneurial in spirit and who show their commitment to growing the relationship. And our government's approach is to, as the Prime Minister says, make sure that those who have a go get a go, and in a trading sense that's about ensuring that businesses who want to invest and grow in Australia get the maximum opportunity to sell their goods and services to our region and the world.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, my pleasure.